Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Joel Saldana with the National Head Start Association, welcoming you to NHSA's and Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation's Grow More Good Garden Grant webinar, Garden Grant Program. Today we have the Celebrating Winter with Gardening Activities, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this series of webinars, which we have about 4 every year, is a partnership between Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation, National Head Start Association, and KidsGardening, and all to help programs instill the growth of garden programs in their Head Start children. You can always visit us for more information at the lower left-hand side there. These slides are available to you. They are on the handout section of the webinar, and there's also another resource page that's available to you as well. But this link will get you there, and the slides are available to you, so you don't have to, hurry to write anything down. We have a quick video we'd like to play.
Every child deserves to grow up healthy and strong, to feel empowered to dream big. But not every child is able to feel secure in this world. What if we gave children a safe space where they could let their curiosity grow? What if we could empower them to know where their food comes from, to get outside and get their hands dirty, to plant a seed and watch it grow, and to learn that a little bit of teamwork can really make something come to life? Gardens are improving young lives all across America by giving children the knowledge to grow something greater. The Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation's partnership with the National Head Start Association will give children the opportunity, maybe even for the first time, to pluck tomatoes and green beans straight from the vine and taste for themselves that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. Gardens can give families facing food insecurity the right tools and the confidence to make things blossom. When we partner together, we can build a new future for children and their communities, one filled with healthy bodies and minds, where dreams are nurtured just like a garden. And so our work begins, because wherever gardens grow, hope grows too.
And want to thank our partners who are at the Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation, who have made this partnership possible. Every year for the last 3 years, we have done this partnership where programs across the country, Head Start programs, are allowed to apply for a grant and get a garden started in their own backyard to help their Head Start program. Start a garden or grow a garden if they already have one, help it grow in size. And so the folks at Scotts Miracle-Gro are great partners. Of course, you know about us, National Head Start Association. We are here to serve Head Start members, and our good folks at KidsGardening, whom you will be hearing about a little bit more here as we get started. Again, we have Christine Gall, who is our program director, and Sarah Pounders, who is the senior education specialist from KidsGardening. These are the folks that know everything about gardening, and we look to for all the expertise. We just want to get to the webinar agenda, again, introduction, so you have an idea who we are. We shared some of that already. I'll share a little bit about this year's garden grant cycle. The deadline is coming up. I'll have that on the slides for you. What the gardening in the winter can look like, and some indoor and outdoor activities, along with some resources for educators, and we'll do some Q&A at the very end. You can also ask a question anytime you like throughout the session. And I just got a note that there is no sound. I just want to do a quick sound check. Are folks able to hear sound? Or is that just one person that might be having a tech issue?
I can hear everything, Joelle.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Taylor. I just wanted to make sure that might be a tech issue on that person. We'll help them out in a little bit. But it looked like we were transmitting well. I just wanted to double check. You never know. But anyways, the webinar agenda, they're closing out with Q&A. And you can ask any questions, at any point if you like, and we'll try to get to those throughout. And again, you can do that by putting questions into the chat box. You can ask any of the organizers questions, or just put them into the chat, or raise your hand in the software. We'll come to that, okay? And again, just a quick overview. We shared the video, which provides most of the information. But this partnership is something that we're very proud of, the National Head Start Association, in working with the Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation and KidsGardening. When we think about the ability for children at that very young critical age to have the ability to use their hands, their minds, get dirty with soil, with dirt, and make plants come together. You see them from seeds to real life in their own backyard, in their own program. That really helps a child's development to be that close to their food from a very early age, and it inspires good nutrition choices and food choices later on in their life, and obviously helping them have a lifelong love of gardening. So that's a very quick overview. You can always visit our website for more information if you have any more questions. This year's garden grant details. So for the 2021 year, we will be doing a set of grants between the range of $2,500 to $5,000, and the total pot of money there is $50,000. So depending on whether you are a program that is just starting out a grant, the way you are just starting out a garden, you'll want to write your grant proposal of how you would use those $5,000 to start out the grant, and how it makes more sense to go for the higher amount. If you have a smaller garden already and you're only looking to add a little bit to that, it might make more sense, more compelling to the review committee if you write for $2,500 or on the lesser side, just to add on some more. Or if you're doing something where there is no central garden location, you are doing like mini garden pot planting opportunities in the child's home, in the family's home, for X amount of families, then you can vary how much you're going to be applying for there. Just explain that story as most grant writers do. Explain that story of how that money is going to be used. Again, there is more information on how and what you can apply for in the grant application. You do have to have an NHSA membership. Obviously, we're not offering this to programs that are not members. Here's the link to the website, and you can click on there, and it'll get you to the web page. Again, the deadline is the 18th, so next Friday. Please be sure to get that in. We will try and get announcements done later in 2021, or at the beginning of 2021 in January. But please do take a look at getting all that turned in by December 18th, next Friday. And this is just a quick shot of the application at the top of the page there. You can always go check it out. Again, that's here, and you can start your application and also save it for a time later if you don't have all the information that you need right away. So that's kind of it, and we'll getting to understand who's on the phone, or who's watching with us today. We have our first poll question, which is if you've joined the NHSA Gardening webinar in the past year. So we'll go ahead and launch that and see what folks are saying. Again, we're just trying to get an idea of whether any of these folks on today have been able to join a NHSA Gardening webinar in the past year. And, we can say yes, no. And the last one, which, I wrote out, was we can't remember. It's kind of hard to remember all the calendar appointments for the last year. So it's just a good idea of us to understand how many folks are coming back every time and how many folks are brand new. Just give it a few more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and close that out. And it looks like we have 34% that have not joined in the past, and 65%, or excuse me, 34% that have joined in the past, 65 that have not joined, so welcome first time. And for the 1% that can't remember, thanks for being honest. You know, sometimes we ourselves don't even remember. So thank you for that. And poll number 2, we would just like to understand who is on the webinar today. Sometimes we have Head Start teachers, other folks doing early ed work, you know, family services, at-home caregivers, administrators, you know, that could be Head Start directors, Head Start leaders, curriculum specialists. Why don't you let us know? And we do, it's not showing on the screen, but you can select other as well if none of those you feel is where you land. Just give it a few more seconds. All right, why don't we close that out? And about 63% are early childhood educators and staff, about 20, just under 20 program managers, directors, 4% are curriculum folks, 0% parents. That kind of makes sense. I'm sure they're busy at home with their child right now, and 13% other. So that 13% other, we probably need to update our the way we're asking the question just to try and capture the differences there. All right. So first up is Sarah Pounders with KidsGardening. Sarah, I think I'm going to make you controller, and I think you'll be able to go forward from there.
Let me adjust my camera a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you.
Well, great. Well, welcome to our webinar today. We are really excited to be able to share with you what can gardening look like in the winter. So I think at least one of my personal goals today is that so many times we have teachers and parents both alike, like gardening is in the spring. So gardening is a springtime activity, and it's great to garden in the spring. There's so much fun things you can learn from that. But we really hope to be able to share with you ideas about how gardening is really a year-long process. And you can do it at any time, and it's very good to do it at any time so that kids can really start to understand plants and how the seasons work and how they can be connected to it all year round. And there's a lot of fun stuff to do in the winter. And that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to share some of our favorites. So that's how we've broken down this webinar today, is we're going to share what our favorites. But before we get into the activities, I just want to do a little bit of background about what can a garden look like in the winter. Because if you're looking out right now into snow, you're thinking, I'm not sure how I can garden in the winter, but there's lots of different ways to do it. Let me see if I can advance the slides. Joelle, I can't seem to, what do I hit to advance the slides? Let me see here. It's supposed to let me advance the slides. Joelle or Taylor, can you help me advance the slides? It doesn't seem to be moving for me.
Yeah, I'm looking into it now too.
I also have it on my screen if I need to.
So do you have the slides up, or is Joelle presenting?
I believe Joelle's presenting. This is his screen share.
Ah, that's probably what it is. Hang on one second.
Sorry, guys. I can also, if there's a way to switch it over.
Sarah, this is Joel. Can you hear me? It should allow you to make it. Yeah.
Okay, it's still not advancing for me. What do I need to hit to have it advance? There it goes. Or there's someone else. Okay. Okay. All right. I think you guys can see my screen now. And I'm going to, let me reboot real quick. Okay. Can everybody see the slides now?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. All right. Back to gardening in winter. Sorry about that, everyone. So what are some different things that you can do to garden during the winter time? So there's a couple different things we're going to break it down to today. We're going to talk about what can you do outside, what kind of plants might be out there that would be interesting for you, and what kind of activities can you do. And then we're going to switch gears and talk about indoor plants and what we can do inside that keeps us gardening. So for those times when it really is just too cold or too unpleasant to be outside, what else can we do? So it's a little bit of everything. So first off, outdoor gardening. So just because it's cold outside does not mean that you can't go outside. And in fact, this is one of those things that's going to depend a lot on where you live. So Christine and I today are going to give you some extremes of climate, because I am located in Texas and she is in Vermont. So we are showcasing the full range of this country here, because I live in the milder climates and can talk a little bit about what you can keep growing outside and you can keep gardening in a more active way. And she's going to highlight some of the things that can happen in the colder climates, where you can really, use that time to look at shrubs, because shrubs and trees that have lost their leaves. It's a great time to look at the structure and to look at the buds and the bark and that kind of thing. And also some other activities that you can do outdoors. So we have to give you a full range today. So for instance, in the mild climates, a lot of the lower south can actually still keep growing. You can have greens like lettuce and spinach, whole crops like broccoli and cabbage. Some of the root crops, they can keep growing, or they can even just be stored in the soil for later harvesting. And my absolute favorite plant of all times for cool weather is pansies. So, and all of these things are very possible when you use season extenders, such as just simple way is just sheets and blankets, cover them up on cold days. A little bit more advanced is a cold frame, and this is an example. This is a middle school actually, where they built their own cold frame out of milk cartons, and they used old sheets of plastic over that, so that the keeps the sun will soak on when the sun is out, keep that area warm. They close them up during the day, and basically they can keep growing when you normally would not be able to grow outside still. We've got hoop houses, row covers, greenhouses, and we're just kind of just touching on these just a little bit today, and we have some additional resources to send you for more information. So like I mentioned, in colder climates, you're going to be more looking at, exploration outside, looking at the winter bird and winter wildlife observation, looking at what the plants look like when they're in their dormant state. So that's kind of there's still a lot of fun things to do out there. And then just turning gears, another way that you can approach your winter garden season is to bring the garden inside, to enjoy the indoors and to keep having things green and growing around you. And that can be done very simply with a windowsill that gets a lot of light. You can also step it up a notch and go and have grow lights. And here's an example, this picture here of a prefabricated unit. There's also a lot of do-it-yourself units that you can do just from getting lights from a hardware store or a garden center. And then you can also do things like traditional containers. So in this picture here, you can see that they're growing in soil and pots. But you can also do fun things like hydroponics, which is growing in water. So lots of different options. If you are looking at a windowsill and you might want to do that, you want to pick a window. Generally, if it's facing south and west, it will get a little more sunlight. You usually need to remember that your windowsill is going to be cooler than the rest of the room generally. So keep that in mind when you're picking out what plants to grow. If you have a windowsill, it's not going to be quite as much bright sunlight. So you want to do plants that just need low light. That's the great thing about plants, is there's plants adapted for just about every place in the whole world. And so if you can find plants that will grow best in your location, that's great. It's definitely the least expensive option. And I just want to add this word of caution. So if you're going to grow some plants in windowsills, please make sure to protect your windowsills from any water that might drip learn this one the hard way, because you want to make sure that you've got some kind of catchment system, so if you have extra water coming through your pots. So if you're going to go grow lights, like I said, there's prefabricated units, there's do-it-yourself units, and we have some links later on in the presentation for that to get you started. The nice thing about them is that you do have better control over the light and your temperature and your humidity. You can put it anywhere in the room. You can buy them on wheels, and you can move them from room to room, which is a lot of fun too. So if you only have enough funds for like one classroom, you can move it from classroom to classroom and everybody can get a turn. Really gives you a lot more control over what plants you can grow, and also expands, like I said, where you can put it. You can put it someplace where there are no windows. You can put it in a hallway where everybody can walk by and share the experience. So just the very, very gardening basics. So what do you need to think about when you're deciding to do an indoor garden? The two main factors that are kind of limit what you can grow are your light availability and your temperature. If you're going to start plants from seeds, usually you need to have pretty good light, especially during the early stages, so they don't get leggy, and that means that they grow really fast trying to reach the light, and so they'll have very long stems that aren't very stable. So you always want to keep your light as close as you can to the little plants. Like I mentioned, houseplants are a really good option for that. There's all sorts of lights you can choose from, and just remember that you probably are going to leave them on for a very long time. So if you're only in your building, say 8 to 10 hours, you may need to look into having something that has timers, because generally when you're growing things under lights, you leave it on from anywhere from 14 to 16 hours a day, because it's obviously not as strong in sunlight. But once again, depends on the plants you choose. Basic needs, cool temperatures. This is another thing I learned the hard way, is that you need to check and see what your center might be doing for temperatures on weekends or at night. I worked with a classroom that was out in a portable building, and I did not realize that they completely turned off all the heating at night. So every night, everything was getting freezing cold, and then it was getting warm, brought up to room temperature during the day. And so those plants had a crazy season for a while. So I couldn't figure out why they weren't growing, and that was because it was like 30 degrees at night. So some things, just basic things real quick. What can you grow? So indoors, you can grow greens, microgreens, which is really just, here's a picture over here of some radishes. Those are actually almost ready to harvest. Microgreens are just when you plant seeds, and there's some plants that you can grow and eat when they're very, very small. You can add them to salads and to soups. You can add them to sandwiches, things like radishes, broccoli, kale. So things that you can grow to be bigger, but you also can grow and harvest sooner. So, and then we've got beans are another good thing that they're just fun and to experiment with your kids, herbs, root crops, and also, like I mentioned, houseplants. So, and finally, I'd also mentioned hydroponics. It's another fun thing that you can do. There's a lot of different units available. Basically, it is providing everything the plant needs in the water and any unit in the water, and there's lots of different options. Once again, we've got some more resources for you, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So if they're looking for something fun and more technology based, kind of showing kids that plants have all different ways that they can grow. They can grow in vertical gardens, they can grow in containers, they can grow in the ground. So just giving kids that option to be able to see all the different ways plants can grow. So once again, just kind of trying to make sure our little plug to keep you growing. We know right now is a hard time for gardening. As everything is being adapted, you need to think about some different things as you're trying to make sure, that keeping kids safe, such as maybe having enough tools so that every child can have their own tools, or spacing out your planters or your plants so that there's space so that everyone's not crowded. But outdoor gardening can actually be a really good option because it has time outside. You're getting some if you're indoors, you're getting some non-screen time indoors. So you're getting something relaxing and engaging. It's hands-on. You can do it in all different shapes and forms. And we really have heard so many teachers and parents mention the social emotional benefits of gardening right now. Being able to care for something, see it grow, see it change, it just provides a nice stable force right now and something to look forward to. So also, I just threw in some links here. If you are thinking about gardening and you're wondering how people are handling some of the basic things like hand washing out in the garden, or what to do with your harvested fruits and vegetables, what to do if you have adult volunteers coming in. Both of these websites provide some great information and some discussion forums so that you can kind of see what some other educators are doing. So highly recommend it. Just wanted to throw that out there. So now we have another poll question. We're just going to try and get a feel for how many of you have gardened in the past. I know a lot of you are new to the webinar series. So let me see here. I believe I need to launch this poll. And I'm not entirely sure how to do that. Joelle, I'm afraid I'm going to need some help again.
Let me see if I can launch it, Sarah.
I'm sorry.
It's all good, no worries. There, it should be showing on everyone's screen. How many of you have gardened with young children, either at school or at home? And your choices are currently gardening in an ECE setting, have led garden activities in an ECE setting in the past, gardened at home with young children, gardened but never gardened with young children before, or never gardened or gardened with young children. So we'll just give it about 10 more seconds for folks to get their votes in.
Looks like we've got a good mix here, but a lot of people that have gardened before. So hopefully we'll provide you with some new ideas and new inspiration. All right. Let's see if I can get back to the screen. All right, so first up, we're going to present you with some outdoor garden activities, and we're going to have Christine kick it off here with a little bit of feedback on why get outside. And I feel like it's better coming from her because she's out in Vermont. So I think that, you know, if you can get outside in Vermont, you can get outside anywhere.
All right, Sarah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. So I was having some issues with my computer camera and my computer microphone, so it's just going to be my voice calling in from a phone, and fingers crossed that the sound quality stays okay. But I'm really excited to join you all today and to talk about some of the benefits of getting outside in the winter and to share some of my favorite activities with you. So why get outside? Sarah mentioned a handful of the benefits for gardening and getting outside during COVID-19. And a lot of those are the general benefits of gardening. So it's getting out, getting that opportunity to run around, maybe get those wiggles out, let out some steam and some energy. It can be an opportunity to de-stress. Being out in nature can have a calming effect. So there are lots of physical and mental benefits to getting outside and gardening. If you're in a warm climate like Sarah is, why get outside in the winter? Well, it's a perfect time to explore what can be growing in, what we would call, quote, the off season, even though it's still pretty warm there. So it allows you to really explore the full array of what can grow in a particular area. If you were to ask me why get outside in the winter, as someone who lives in Vermont, a very cold climate, where we get lots of snow and gardening pretty much becomes impossible. Why get outside and get into the garden? Well, it's a great opportunity to connect to other growing things other than like vegetables or flowers, and thinking about how we can include that kind of conception of what's growing throughout the winter, what's growing year round, and begin to kind of think about that in conjunction with what might be growing in a garden and what we can get from nature and what we can get from our surroundings. So it really deepens that relationship that you have with your place and with nature. And that's going to kind of be a theme in the 3 activities that I want to share with you right now. So Sarah, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so these are 3 of my favorite outdoor activities to do during the winter. I'm going to go into these in more depth, but just very, very quickly to give you kind of a preview. I'm going to talk about doing some garden exploration, the idea of using dig beds, and something called ice gems to engage curiosity. I'm going to talk about doing some tree observations, which allows kids to really notice the changes in the natural landscape and compare that to other seasons. And then I'm going to talk about a very kind of Vermont and New England specific example of sugaring, which once again allows you to really deepen your connection to place and to understand seasonality and seasonal food production. All right, Sarah, let's head on over to the garden exploration slide. So, garden exploration. During the summer, during the growing season, I love to always just have an empty bed that I call a dig bed. And it's an opportunity for young learners to just get out there and do some digging, to explore what's in the soil, and to just have fun and engage their curiosity. And this is something that you can also do in the winter. So these are a bunch of pictures of some pre-K students that I worked with. And we would just go out there and we'd do some digging like we would normally in the summertime. But we had the entire garden available to us because we had nothing growing in the beds. So it really kind of opened up the doors to exploration. It allowed kids to engage in the garden in a way that they hadn't necessarily been able to before, because they had just this entire blank slate that they could play with and engage their curiosity and use their imagination, digging holes, building up little mountains and hills, things like that, working together to move soil from one area to another. Now, these pictures were taken very, very early in our winter, and the ground hadn't frozen yet. So if you're in a particularly cold climate, you might need to think about the fact that the ground might freeze, and that might prevent you from doing some just digging and exploration in your garden space. But if you happen to have snow that would prevent digging and exploration in your garden space, you can take advantage of that snow as well. So we used to also bring students out into this space when the soil was completely covered, and we would use our wheelbarrows, we'd use our garden tools to move around snow. And we would also hide these things that we called ice gems in the garden for youth to kind of look around for. And ice gems are pretty much, we took some food coloring, we put it a little drop or two in some water, and took an ice cube tray, so that each of the ice cubes we were freezing was a really bright color. And then we kind of cracked that tray open, took out all these really wonderfully colored ice cubes, and hid them in different places in our garden. And it was just a really, really fun opportunity for kids to look around and discover these really beautiful treasures. And sometimes they pretend like they were seeds and they were planting them in these snow-covered beds. And it was just a really, really fun way to engage in kind of like open exploration and play. So that's one of my favorite activities, but I want to share my next one, which is going to be tree observations. So in Vermont, we don't have anything growing in our garden. So if we want to look at plants and kind of make that connection between living things that we might have in our garden and things that are growing all year round, we're going to be looking at trees. And if you do a little bit of forethought, this is something that you can do all year round. So you could pick a single tree that you might have, near your outdoor space, and you might look at it in the fall, then in the winter, the spring, and the summer. You might look at it monthly, and you can practice using different sorts of descriptive language. You can do observational drawings. You can be identifying shapes and patterns and seeing how all those that tree kind of changes over time and applying these things to those conversations and to these observations of a tree. One really fun thing you can do to make it extra exciting is you can make little pretend binoculars. And so that's the child on the right has these pretend binoculars that we made. And you can use like an old toilet paper roll, but those can kind of be squishy and they can collapse really easily. So this time of year, if you happen to be wrapping any presents, you can save the long cardboard tube and chop it into small pieces and then just wrap a bunch of duct tape around it. You can even put a little string kind of under the duct tape so that a child can put those binoculars around their neck. So when you go out and you're looking at a tree, they can be looking through those binoculars and really, really carefully kind of exploring that tree with their eyes and thinking about what are the shapes they're seeing? What are the words they could use to describe that tree? You could do drawings if you want, either inside or outside. And again, it's just a really fun way to get to know your place and get to know and notice change over time and explore seasonality. So that's my second activity. And then my last activity is also tied to exploring seasonality. And as a disclaimer, this is a very kind of Vermont-specific example, learning about sugaring, which is the process of making maple syrup. We have a really robust maple syrup industry here in Vermont and in other areas of New England and even some areas in the Midwest. So, you know, I know that there are probably lots of people on this call who are not from those areas, and that's totally okay, because I think the reasoning behind exploring sugaring might still apply to you. And basically, it's the idea that you are getting to know your place. You're getting to know what can be grown year-round. You're getting to know how you can interact with nature and what you can get from nature year-round. So thinking about food production, and thinking about kind of more some unusual forms of food production, perhaps. If you're talking about gardening, a lot of kids might begin to think that it's something that only happens when it's warm out, but you can be getting food from different sources all year long. And sugaring is really cool, right? Because you're getting sap from trees and then it's turning into something delicious that you put on pancakes. And so these pictures are from a pre-K program that I worked at an educational farm. And we had the opportunity to go to a sugar bush and to see an evaporator and a sugar house and interact with those spaces, which was really engaging. But if you're in the area of the Northeast or the Midwest that doesn't have that sort of access, you can kind of still learn about these things and recreate these learning opportunities in a classroom. So that center photo is we made like a little fake evaporator out of some boxes, and we filled it with sticks and pieces of wood to kind of emulate a fire, and then filled the top with a bunch of corks, and that was our maple syrup and our sap. If we go to the next slide, I have a couple more pictures of students kind of engaging and learning about maple syrup and sugaring. The picture all the way on the left is us exploring a sugar bush, and you can see some of the blue lines that go in between the trees, and those are the tubes that carry sap from tree to tree and eventually to a sugar house. And we took some of those lines and we took empty maple syrup containers and we brought them into our classroom, and we would put them out on a water table for kids to play with. And it was a neat way for them to make the connection between kind of these more play toys, things that they were just having fun with, and, you know, what they were used for in real life, because they had seen those at a sugar bush. And then they were also taking their observations from that kind of experience of kind of exploring outside and using it for art projects, which is the picture all the way on the right. And you can see those are drawings and, you know, pictures of trees. So you could be making those connections to some of the tree observations that you were doing earlier. So those are my three kind of favorite things to do in the winter with young learners. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now to share her three favorite things to do outside.
All right. So my favorite three things to do outside. First of all, I'm a big flower person. So I'm going to talk about getting some flowers into the winter time. I'm natural art, anything in nature, and then also the birds. I'm also a huge fan of watching birds and feeding birds. So winter bloom. So in a milder climate, things like pansies can grow almost the whole year round. So I love to grow pansies, not only because I just think they're happy flowers. Like if they made a happy flower, it would be a pansy, but also you can do a lot of fun crafts with it. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. I can't see it on my computer, but I did bring some pressed flowers. You can press them and then in between some phone books or just in some tissue. And so that is a, you know, just a fun activity and a craft that you can do for other times. There's also a lot of very fun blooming bulbs, spring blooming bulbs that you can plant in the fall, and then they bloom in the spring. And some of them bloom very early. Crocus, snowflake, snowdrops. Usually the smaller they are, the earlier they bloom. And so those can be a lot of fun for kids. Now the hitch is that a lot of the bulbs are poisonous, so I always want to make that caution when I'm talking to early childhood audiences. So keep that in mind. But if you have kids that are mature and you know that aren't going to try and eat everything you're planting, because they're definitely not edible, they make a lot of fun because they pop out early and they're just small and tiny, and it's like a little treasure hunt with your little bulbs as they come up. So another cool plant is a witch hazel. These are shrubs that bloom very, very early, like January or February, and many of them have a very nice scent, so they can be a lot of fun if you can find a place to incorporate that at your center. And if you're in the far south, you can also look into camellias, which are a lot of fun. However, if you don't have any of these things and you don't, another cool thing that you can do is that you can actually take some of the plants that bloom early in the spring. So think about, the spring, what blooms early. You can actually cut those, bring them into the classroom, and you can make them bloom faster for you. So you actually can bring spring buds. Usually the best time frame is 6 weeks early. So if you, for instance, the example that I would give would be red buds. So red buds in my location in Texas usually bloom in early March or sometime in March. So I could bring those in say mid-February, bring them in, cut them, put them in water, and they could start blooming for me inside. I actually went out, all of these plants, the reason why they can do that is they actually set their flower buds in the fall. So they're already on the trees, they're already on the shrubs, they're not going to develop anymore. So that's why you can kind of make them hurry up a little bit and enjoy those. And you can also have a bud hunt. So you can look for them on the trees and show kids how some of them are going to develop into flowers and some of them are going to develop into leaves later. And so I just put a list here of some of the things that you might look for. And many of these grow all over the country. They just kind of bloom in different areas. So red maples are something that I know are very common. Forsythias, red buds are the one that I mentioned that I have a lot of access to. Pussy willows, apples, cherries, dogwoods, all of these things you can kind of look into. So there's a link to the full instructions if you think that might be something you'd want to try. The next thing that I love to do is any kind of nature art. So going outside, and there's just natural materials, even in the snow in the wintertime, all of these things can be found. Acorns, twigs, seeds, cones, pine needles, all sorts of different evergreen leaves that you can find. And you can do a number of different things with them. One is to actually create works of art just with these pieces and stay outside and create those artworks. And so Andy Goldsworthy has some great examples, and I put a link there to kind of his archive page of what he's done. But basically just art that it may not be permanent, but it's very pretty and nice to look at. And then you can take a picture of it, keep a record of it, make a little book for the kids. They can even have an outdoor art show, maybe, of things that they've used using natural materials. Another thing, so if you're collecting these natural materials that I've done before, is to make wreaths. And for the very youngest kids, I would get the straw wreaths from the craft store. And then as long as they're not too tight, you can stick things in there. You can stick twigs, you can sometimes stick different leaves in there. So basically it's kind of like a little collage of things, but you stick it in a wreath so it's kind of pretty and you can hang it up full of natural materials. Another thing that's great is all sorts of creative painting and prints. So just basically you can use, for instance, pine needles. We've done this a lot in place of brushes. You can make prints. So make your own wrapping paper, make bookmarks, make note cards from using prints from different leaves, and then they look at the shapes. Or we've even used pine cones and kind of dip them in paint and roll them across. And that might be something, as long as it's not too cold for the paint, you might want to do outside, because it also can sometimes be a little messy. But it's a lot of fun. And then it kind of helps the kids look at the texture and study the different parts of the natural materials. Once again, document with photos if you're doing anything outside, and so that you can kind of create an art show and an art book for them to remember it by. Finally, I always love feeding the birds. So, the best thing that would be great is to have shrubs and trees in your landscape that provide food and shelter for the birds during the winter months. But you can also supplement that with some different bird feeder type of decorations. So for instance, traditional one is obviously the seed encrusted pine cones. And just to note that, if you do have kids with nut allergies, you might be able to substitute sun butter for peanuts. This right here is a suet cutout. It looks like a heart. We actually did these for Valentine's Day, kind of a love the birds kind of thing. You could do cranberry garlands. We have a full range of instructions on this website and on this link for you to look at. And we also have a link on here for the second one is for common birds that you might see all across the country. And I am listing this as an outdoor activity because once again, it can be pretty messy. So it's a great thing if you've got a nicer day to go outside and put these together, you know, to do it. It can also be done indoors. Definitely can be, and this is kind of an indoor-outdoor to actually make them, and outdoor to actually observe the birds and watch what's going on. So these are some of my favorites. And now we're kind of look at indoor winter garden activities. And indoors, it's like I said, it's great to bring the garden in to keep it going and to be able to show kids, you know, that it's also a great time to be able to see other types of plants from other places in the world also, because a lot of our house plants are from different places. So I will turn it back over to Christine, and so she can talk about her top 3 favorite indoor activities.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to share kind of a 3-part activity that revolves around using a book and the story kind of as a jump-off point. I'm going to talk a little bit about taste testing, which is very near and dear to my heart, kind of the opportunity to get young learners feeling comfortable trying new things. And then I'm going to wrap it up with a quick discussion about kitchen scrap gardening. Because as Sarah said, it can be really fun to explore new plants or different ways of growing things. And kitchen scrap gardening, it can be kind of an unusual approach to growing food, but really, really fun. So let's go to our next slide. This is one of my go-to activities. I absolutely love doing this with young learners. So there's this really wonderful book called One Bean by Anne Rockwell, and it's about 2 siblings who plant a single bean seed and it turns into a nice large bean plant. And it takes you through the different steps of that bean's life cycle. And it's a very simple, easy to read book with great pictures. And what I like to do after having read that book is to do a dress up as a bean plant activity. And this kind of allows learners to like synthesize the information from the book so they can remember the different steps of the bean's life cycle. And as we go through those different steps, we dress up a student. So I would start with like a green raincoat and putting that on as like a seed, kind of the outer coating of a seed. And then we would talk about how as the seed was put in water and as it was, or put in soil and as it was watered, that it started to sprout. So I might pull out a little spray bottle and give that student wearing that raincoat a little spray, giving them some water. And then we would put their roots on. And the roots are just a bunch of kind of brown pieces of paper that look a little bit squiggly. And usually I would tape them to something like a pipe cleaner so that you can easily just put it right around their ankles. And once they're got their roots out, their feet are firmly in place, they can't move around anymore, and then their leaves come out. And so I would give them some cut out green pieces of paper in the shape of leaves, and we might tape that onto their green raincoat. And then the flowers might come out before we get our bean. And so I might give them a flower and stick that in their pocket. And then finally, I would hand them some beans to show that those beans had sprouted off that plant. And you can kind of joke at the end that, oh no, you just lost a student because there's a giant bean plant standing in your classroom. And it's always kind of a fun moment of make-believe and pretend, and dress up is always kind of exciting. So that's a nice way to kind of debrief that story. And then to do kind of one step further, you can then have a planting activity where you get to actually see that story come to life in your classroom. And I have 2 links here to kids gardening activities. The germination exploration would just be kind of planting a bean seed in a container of soil, and then you're able to watch its growth, versus a seed viewer kind of allows you to see more of that plant actually grow. You plant it in a container that will allow you to see the roots sprout. And that can kind of be interesting since that's usually hidden from view when you're growing in soil or growing outside in a garden. So that's a really fun kind of 3-part activity that you can do to tackle life cycles in seeds. And if we head on to the next one, taste testing. Taste testing, as I said, it's kind of my bread and butter. As an educator for a local school district for a while, that's all I did during the winter time. We would just try different foods. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about that process in a second. But first, I want to talk about like how do you choose what you're going to kind of feature? Because you can do taste tests all year round, but to deepen kind of the connection and to make it a more meaningful experience, you can think about where in the year you are and selecting seasonal produce. So I've got a list of produce that is kind of primarily harvested during the winter time, and this is kind of a snapshot of all over the U.S. So, you know, we certainly aren't growing citrus fruits in the wintertime in Vermont, but these things are kind of primarily being produced during the winter months somewhere in the U.S. So those are all seasonal things that you can make that connection, but you can also think about storage crops, which are frequently used and consumed during the winter. And then I don't have this up here, but you also might think about choosing culturally appropriate foods and culturally relevant foods to taste. So in the school district that I used to work with, we had a large New American population, and it was always a really beautiful moment of kind of like empowerment and visibility for youth to be able to try food that was relevant to their like non-white cultures. And so I would encourage you to also think about that as well. So if we go to the next slide, this kind of is going to provide a breakdown of how you can like structure taste testing. So once you've chosen something to taste test, are you doing that independently and you're just trying it and thinking about it? Or are you doing a compare and contrast? So are you trying oranges and a different citrus fruit, like a grapefruit? Once you've tried something, you definitely want to create space to reflect on that taste test experience. So in this photo, we have some kids that are voting. And whenever I used to do this with students, we would kind of break it down into I loved it, it's okay. So like I'm kind of on the fence. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good. And then a no thank you category. And that no thank you or it's not for me, it was a different way of saying, in a more polite way of saying like, ew, yuck, it's gross, blah. And really having conversations about how we can be polite in expressing our differences and our dislikes. And so you can really focus on that descriptive vocabulary and expanding kind of vocabulary around taste, around texture. There are so many different conversations that you can have. And then if you want to really dig even more deep, you can think about doing some basic food preparation. So instead of just trying an orange, integrating the orange into some sort of recipe. And of course, that requires some resources and some extra planning. But you know, when kids have the opportunity to prepare something or even grow something in the garden, they're a little bit more inclined to enjoy that experience of trying it. All right, we're going to quickly go to our next activity and wrap up super fast so Sarah can have some time to share her 3 favorite indoor ones. Kitchen scrap gardening. So this could be a great extension of a taste test. Let's say you're trying some carrots, and at the end you have all these little kind of the tops of carrots and you don't know what you're going to do with them. You can actually put those in water and you can regrow some of the greens on top. Because essentially kitchen scrap gardening is using food scraps to grow new foods or kind of grow new parts of foods. And if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of break down how that happens because there are a bunch of different ways that you can do kitchen scrap gardening. And one of the ways is by forcing new top growth from root vegetables. So that would be that carrot example that I showed you. You can also just take the seeds out of things and replant them. So we've got some oranges in this picture. You could be taking out seeds, replanting those, seeing if you get a little sprout. You can also use tubers. So those would be potatoes or sweet potatoes. And you can start to grow a new plant from like half of a potato. And you can also be sprouting some spicy greens, things like scallions. And I realize that's a very quick overview, but on this slide, there's 2 links. The title of the slide would take you to a kind of how-to activity of kids gardening. And then we also have a video that walks you through the different ways to practice kitchen scrap gardening. So those are 3 of my favorite indoor activities. that I like to do during the winter. And I'm going to let Sarah share her 3 favorites now.
All right, and I'm going to try and run through these fast. I know I probably talked too long earlier, so I apologize. So my absolute favorite 3 indoor activities, and this is something that all kids love, and it is a plant pal. It's a homemade chia pet. And basically, I have one growing here. I think you guys can see my screen, but it's basically a pair of pantyhose, and you put a layer of seeds, grass seed. It's just basically like the seed that you'd buy to it's annual ryegrass is what I usually use, and it's available usually in the fall and the spring, and some people overseed their lawns depending on where you live, or either just it's the grass seed that you use to fix patches sometimes in your yard. And then you stuff it, you open up you have to close one end, you pour your seeds in, and then you put in soil, close it up, and put some eyes on it and put any other kinds of things. This is like hands down with every garden program I've ever done, every child's favorite indoor activity. And it's easy to grow, doesn't need a lot of light, doesn't need a lot of water. And we do have full instructions coming up soon on how to make those homemade plant pals. Another thing that's a lot of fun are terrariums, and terrariums can be any kind of container. It's the easiest garden you ever grow. We actually did this once with my daughter's 2-year-old class, sorry, her 2-year-old preschool class. And I had a mom tell me like 4 years later, she's like, that thing is still alive. So she just was holding on to it to see, and they hadn't done anything to it. Basically, you put just a layer of gravel, and you can put a little bit of charcoal, and that's optional. That some people think that helps with like the smell, but it's a closed, and honestly, I've never used charcoal in mine. So I usually just put a layer of small rocks, layer of soil, and then you do some indoor plants. And there's all sorts of kind of plants you can use. Basically what, if you go to a garden center, there's usually some very small, like 4-inch pot indoor plants that you can use a selection of. Some of my favorites to use are African violets, just because they're pretty readily available. It depends on how much space you have, but I love African violets because, like I mentioned, I love blooms. So that's part of why they're right up there. They're like the indoor version of a pansy is an African violet. Another thing is you can divide them, and as some of them will get bigger. So you're looking for things that are slow growing. Basically, it's any kind of indoor container. So for instance, we get rice that comes in a clear container. This would make a perfect terrarium. This one is from sugar cubes. So all sorts of things, pretzels sometimes come in big tubs, all sorts of things, soda bottles is the other example that's in there. So that can be a fun indoor activity. And like I said, we do have the full instructions there. And finally, a lot of fun for me, especially with classrooms, because you want to try and keep costs down, is just to start new plants from old plants. And once again, this comes into just having an African violet, for example. You can actually cut off a leaf, and you could put one leaf in this stem into a new soil, and you want to try and keep the humidity high, so you would cover it. You put a pot in soil, cover it with a plastic baggie, and it actually will, first of all, grow new roots. And then you'll start to see whole nother little plant will come out of here right at the base of the soil. So there are a lot of plants that are really fast to grow, and I've listed some of them: coleus, geraniums, African violets, succulents. Once again, we have the full details up on our website, but that's a great way to kind of make lots of new plants for all your students in a fairly inexpensive way. And this is another one of my favorites. It's called a strawberry geranium. It's really not a strawberry or a geranium, but at the base, it actually will put out little stolons, and new plants will start, little plantlets will start growing. You can take each one of these and put it in soil and have a whole new plant. So as you can see, I have probably 30 new plants ready to start on this one little 4-inch pot plant. So if you can find strawberry geraniums, that can keep your class busy for quite some time. So we wanted to share out some general resources. These are some of the things that we definitely have relied on for ideas. Christine has put Chop Chop. It's one that she goes to look for recipe ideas. Shelburne Farms has some farm to early childhood resources. We also have put links. This is the website we put together with NHSA and Scotts Miracle-Gro and it has a collection of resources that are kind of like our favorites for early childhood, everything from lesson plan ideas and activities. We also have put into this presentation, if you download the PDF, some links to some additional things. Some of them we've talked about today, a few of them we didn't get to, but basically it's just lots of things you can do in the winter and have fun in the winter, both outdoors and indoors. And I also wanted to put a link, and this is also in your handout section, as we've put together some kind of 5 basic lesson plans. They're kind of, if anyone's familiar with our Lessons to Grow By, they're kind of the early childhood edition of Lessons to Grow By. But basically, it is on the 5 basic topics of plant life cycles, plant needs, plant parts, pollinators, and soil. And every single one of them kind of revolves around a book, a children's gardening book, and then activities to go with it. So everything from seed viewers to some of the things we've talked about today, and a few new things too. So we wanted to share that resources out with you guys. And also, if you're looking for some more indoor gardening resources, we also have our Grow Lab book. It's a complete guide. It's just basically a lot of indoor basics. If you're really, just from watering to light to humidity to problems you might come up with, that kind of thing. And so I don't know how much time we have for questions. So I know that I don't have time in front of me, but I know that we're running short. So I will, Christina, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, or Joelle, if you think we have time for any questions, or if we had any questions come in. I haven't been monitoring it.
Yeah, I've been sending the chat a couple of times to let folks know to drop in any questions. I've not seen anything come through on the chat, Sarah, and I've not seen anything come through on our questions page either.
All right.
Yeah, I would
well,
say,
Christy.
Oh, I was just going to say, if any questions do come to mind kind of after the fact, if you just go to kidsgardening.org and look at our staff page, you should easily be able to find Sarah and I, and you can reach out to us directly if you have any questions about kind of some of the activities that we shared, or if you just want to kind of get some more ideas for different things that you can do.
We have a question from Elisa Jamerson, activities for special needs children.
Oops. I stopped sharing my screen. I'm not sure what's showing.
We can see what can gardening look like in the winter.
Okay. Sorry, let me stop sharing.
So Sarah, the question is, how can we adapt gardening activities for special needs children? And that's a really great question. It obviously depends upon the kind of what kids you're working with, and kind of where they are at. But gardening is really, really wonderful for kids of any, ability or age, in terms of the kind of like therapeutic kind of potential for gardens. So I would say that doing something like a sensory garden is something that we have seen very, very commonly amongst programs that we serve. Sensory gardens are really great because they allow kids that might have kind of issues with different senses to explore those in a really calm environment. And that could be focusing on plants that are really soft to the touch or prickly to the touch, things that smell strongly, things that when kind of like they blow in the wind, they make a certain noise. So thinking about how you can create a garden space that allows you to engage all of the various senses. So that's kind of like, I think, one just thing that comes to mind. But I think when it comes to actually adapting activities, it really is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So I don't know if that was super helpful or not, but.
Well, and just one thing to add on to that, we do have on that resource page, there is a page of kind of recommended plants for young children, because anytime you want to do sensory type activities, you want to make sure not to use anything that might be poisonous or harmful, because different kids are exploring with all their different senses, including their mouths. And so we do have a page that kind of has a list there for you and some links to places to look up. So and I do, a lot of these activities can be done as a group or together, depending on what's needed to kind of adapt them.
dropped the link in the chat room for Kids Gardening ECE, Early Childhood Education resources. So that is a web page that has got a lot of than what we have here for you all to take back with you. Along, we have the handout and the slides available, but just marking that for everyone that the link to Kids Gardening webpage might also have some more information for folks to dig into. And I don't see any other questions that have come in. Just fantastic information and good information, and thank you. So we're glad to hear that this webinar was helpful to you all. Sarah, is there anything else? Other than that, it would be just a reminder for folks that are planning on applying. December 18th is the deadline to apply for a grant, and certainly encourage you to turn in your application by then. We're looking to fund programs, both small and even bigger, and I don't mean Head Start programs, but garden project programs. So please, create a pen and send your garden grant applications in. And the garden grant application, I just saw a question come in, if it's for an individual classroom or for a whole program. So it's essentially how you decide to design your project, but it will be just one entity for your Head Start program. So if it's Arlington Head Start program is applying for that grant, whether that's going to be to serve one classroom or multiple classrooms or multiple families in different centers. All of that is up to you all, but it will be just from one grantee, one entity that gets to submit an application. And I hope that answers your question, Stephanie Jacobs.
And also, Joel,
all
if I
right,
can
Joel,
add,
December 18th. Yes, sir, go ahead.
well, I just want to add in that we also have, Kids Gardening also has youth garden grants. And there's also the Grow More Good grassroots grants, which is for all nonprofit organizations too. So in addition to the NHSA, there's some other options if there's other people looking for funding. So and there'll be links to that too on the same web pages that Joel mentioned.
Great. Well, again, folks, if you have any questions, any doubts, feel free to write out to us, gardens@nhsa.org. If not, we will be looking forward to your applications or see you at the next webinar. Happy holidays, everyone.